Welcome to another segment of English class. Today we'll be looking at adverbial phrase. Adverbial phrase. Well, I believe that this topic is actually a difficult one to some students, while to some it isn't. But trust me when I say you can't, it's not a walkover. No, it's not. Because you will always come across this very topic, even if not adverbial phrases. It could be clauses or adjectival clause or phrase, noun clause or phrase. But it's very pertinent that we study this topic in case we come across such in our exam. Basically, in the comprehension aspects, this very topic, identifying grammatical names and functions, they always come out, and it's important that we know it to our fingertips so as to answer questions when they are asked. So today we'll look at about 4 lesson objectives, hoping that by the end of the lesson all these objectives will be grasped and put into practice. Now we want to look at the definition of adverbs, very important. We can't jump into adverbial phrases without looking at the different keywords that create the topic. So we look at definition of adverbs, definition of phrases, adverbial phrases, and give examples. Then we'll state the function of an adverbial phrase. All right, here we are. Now I would first of all like to state this, that there is a difference between a phrase and a clause. There is a difference between a phrase and a clause. Now, a phrase and a clause together can make up a sentence, a simple sentence at that. But outside a simple sentence, no other type of sentence would be stated as having formed itself using the phrase and the clause. In the morning, she went marketing. In the morning, comma, she went marketing. In the morning is a phrase, while she went marketing is a clause. And joining the two together makes a sentence. Now, looking at the grammatical structure of a sentence, we'll have what we call the sentence. After the sentence, we'll have the clause. After the clause, we'll have the phrase. After the phrase, we have the word. Then from the word, we have what we call morphemes. Now, to differentiate the phrase from the clause, we'll look at just one key thing, and that's the finite verb. I want to believe that we have looked at the finite verbs, what finite verbs are, and non-finite verbs. Now, if at all you have what looks like a verb in a phrase, that must be a non-finite verb. So the difference between the phrase and the clause basically is the finite verb. The finite verb makes a sentence to have sense. Without the finite verb, then what we have in a group of words is the phrase and not the sentence. Now let us look at the definition of a phrase. Phrase can be referred to as group of words that do not have finite verb, or phrases can be referred to as group of words that do not have finite verbs. They can't stand on their own and they don't make sense. They can't stand on their own and they don't make sense. Now, what are adverbs? Adverbs are words that modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. That's basically what adverbs are. But some people would just say adverbs are words that are used to modify verbs. That definition, it's not holistically correct, because adverbs can modify adjectives, adverbs can modify other adverbs. Now let's look at what we have in the slide. Say an adverbial phrase is a group of words used in the same way as an adverb to add further information or detail to a verb, adjective, another adverb, or even whole clauses. The primary function of an adverbial phrase is to modify the verb in the main clause of the sentence. The primary function of the adverbial phrase is to modify the verb in the main clause of the sentence. Now, the word phrase is the key, as this means that it is more than one word rather than a single adverb. That we must know that there's a difference between an adverb and an adverbial phrase. An adverb, just one word. Adverbial phrase or phrases, they are a group of words. Now, this can be quite confusing. That's the difference between adverbs and adverbial phrases. They can be quite confusing as you may hear these terms discussed in different grammar books or websites in reference to adverbs. You have adverbs, you have adverb phrases, and you have adverbial phrases. They all have the same function. Yes, that is it. As much as they appear different in their looks or use, but basically they have one function, and that is to modify the verb in the main clause. It modifies the verb in the main clause. Alright, let's look at this. It says, but the way they tend to be distinguished in grammatical terms is that an adverb is a single word. An adverb is a single word, and an adverb phrase is two or more adverbs joined together. Two or more adverbs joined together. However, an adverbial phrase is a more informative group of words that will contain other words apart from adverbs. Now, it's possible for you to see an adverbial phrase and you wouldn't know if you are not conversant with it, because if you're looking out to see an adverb in those group of words, you may necessarily not see an adverb, because sometimes adverbial phrases can start off with a preposition. So where you have a preposition starting an adverbial phrase, if you're not conversant with it, you may not necessarily know that it's an adverbial phrase or adverbial clause. So what we are saying in essence is we must know that there's a difference between an adverb phrase and an adverbial phrase. Adverb phrase, just two adverbs joined together, while adverbial phrase may not necessarily be an adverb. It can be more than 2-3 words of different word classes. We have an example here. He said, here are some examples with adverbials of manner, all answering question, how did he drive? Sentence number 1 says, he drove erratically, asking the question how. Remember, adverbs will always ask you questions. Adverbs are one part of speech that always ask questions. He jumped the fence. Where did he jump? The fence. He came home late. When did he come home? He came home late. So that is it. Adverbs will always ask you questions. So this very one shows question of how did he drive. He drove erratically. That's an adverb. The adverb here is erratically. The word erratically is an adverb. He is a pronoun. Drove is a verb. And remember we said both adverb phrase, adverbial phrase, they perform one function, and I will show us in these 3 sentences. He drove erratically. Erratically is the adverb, and it describes, or rather it modifies, it adds meaning to the word drove. How did he drive? We can't have the sentence he drove. It's possible we say he drove, but we want to add more meaning to he drove, and we added erratically. So that's what an adverb does. It adds more meaning, an extra information to a previous sentence. Sentence number 2 says he drove very erratically. It tells us how did he drive? Very erratically. So it's still adverb phrase modifying the verb drove. So very erratically is adverb phrase, not adverbial phrase. Then finally we have adverbial phrase. In this last sentence, you would see that we don't have an adverb. I will analyze the sentence and you will see that we don't have an adverb. But from one point of the sentence to another, we can classify that as adverbial phrase because it tells us how. Adverb has equations. And I once told us that prepositions are used to introduce adverbs. Now the third example says he drove in an erratic way. He drove in an erratic way. How did he drive? In an erratic way. This in is a preposition by default, but looking at it from this point to way, you will agree with me, it's adverbial phrase. So if we underline from in to way, it is adverbial phrase. Why? Because it shows us how the person drove. That's what it shows, how the person drove. So in this case, it's an adverbial phrase, not an adverb phrase, and not an adverb. Alright, so he is a pronoun, drove is a verb, in is a preposition, an is an article, erratic is an adjective, and way is a noun. So you see that all of these, in all these, in the last sentence, no word shows adverb, but from the point of in to way, we term it as adverbial phrase, modifying the verb drove. That's the function. Remember we said the function of an adverbial phrase, function of an adverb, function of an adverb phrase is that it modifies the verb in the words, in the clause. He drove is a sentence, is a simple sentence, and a simple sentence has a finite verb, can stand on its own, it makes sense, and it expresses a particular thought. As a matter of fact, main clauses can be referred to as simple sentences. So if you see he drove in an erratic way, we can split the sentence into two. He drove as a clause, in an erratic way as a phrase. And the phrase here is an adverbial phrase, modifying the verb drove. Right, so as you will see from the last one, units of words can function as adverbs without actually containing an adverb. Yes, like I earlier explained, units of words can function as an adverb without actually containing an adverb. Why? Because that part of the sentence showed us how something was done. And as long as it answers a question, it is an adverb. Whether it starts with an adverb or not, that is one thing we must understand. So it's not necessarily that it will start with an adverb, but ask yourself, is it asking a question? Is that part of a sentence answering a question? If it's answering a question posed, then it's an adverb. Adjectives don't ask questions. Nouns don't ask questions, because these are the three grammatical names that we have: adverbial clause, adverbial phrase, noun clause, noun phrase, adjectival clause, adjectival phrase. So of these three, the adverbial is the only one that asks questions. So in the last example, the adverbial phrase is actually a prepositional phrase acting as an adverbial phrase. Why do we say so? Because in is a preposition, and as such can function as an adverbial because it tells us the place where something happened. Alright, however, adverb phrase and adverbial phrase are often used interchangeably, so you should not dwell on which is which. The key thing is that an adverb is one word, but an adverb or adverbial phrase is more than one word. Very vital. It's very important. So if I have a sentence, he drove very erratically, and the underlined part, you have a comprehension passage before you, and in the comprehension passage you have a sentence that states he drove very erratically, and the examiners underlined very erratically and asked you to identify the grammatical name used in the underlined, that is very erratically. That means it's not out of place for you to write adverbial phrase stating the function as modifying the verb drove in it. Now the key thing is that an adverb is one word, but an adverb or adverbial phrase is more than one word. We have types of adverbs or adverbial phrases or adverb phrases. We have adverb of manner, we have of time, we have of place, we have adverb of frequency. All right, but basically the three main types of adverbs usually discussed are adverb of time, adverb of place, and adverb of manner. Adverb of time answers the question, when, adverb of place answers the question where, adverb of manner answers the question how. So once you know these things, it will help you a whole lot to identify the grammatical name used in a sentence and the function. I have stated that the function basically is to modify a verb. That is the main function of adverbials or adverbial phrases, to modify the verb in the main clause, not in any other place. We have the main clause, you have the subordinate clause. But in the case of adverbial phrase, you have the main clause and then the phrase. Yes, the main clause and the phrase. Remember, I told us that a simple sentence can consist of a clause and a phrase. So once there is need to identify a grammatical name in a sentence, note it that your function has to be in the main clause, not in the phrase, because the phrase will be the part that will be underlined. Now, adverbial phrases of manner. We said that an adverbial phrase of manner answers the question how. Now, these are examples. He goes to work by bike. How does he go to work? By bike. So I've underlined by bike, which is an adverbial phrase, and the function is that it modifies the verb in the main clause. And what is the verb in the main clause? Goes. Your verb is an action word. Verb is also a state of being, because it's possible for you to see a verb and not know in the main clause. Why? Because you positioned your mind that verbs are just action words. Verbs are not just action words. They are word linkers and they are state of being words. So once you see those verbs that are not action words, you should know. I've treated them earlier, even in our one of the topics we had, the finite and non-finite verbs. We treated the verb types that we have. So when we talk about state of being verbs, we look at the auxiliary verbs. The auxiliary verbs are our state of being verbs. Am, be, is, was, are, were, been, will, can, could, shall, should, may, might. These are state of being verbs. So for example number 1, we'll state that the function of this adverbial phrase is that it modifies the verb goes. Note something, that what it modifies must be put in either single quotation or double quotation. Single quotation mark or the double quotation mark. Number 2 says he speaks in a very loud voice. How does he speak? In a very loud voice. He speaks is a sentence, is a simple sentence. All right. So we have in a very loud voice is the phrase. Remember what we said earlier, that adverbial phrases have their function performed in the main clause. The function is performed in the main clause, and he speaks is the main clause. Right? What's the function of in a very loud voice? The function is that it modifies the verb speaks. The second one says she sings. How does she sing? Like an angel. So you see that each of these words used to start off the adverbial phrase isn't an adverb. That's one thing we must understand. But the focal point is that they keep asking a question. From the point of the underlining to the end, the question is asked. So that's how you identify your adverbials. Adverbials will always ask questions. If I begin to give you words that are adverbials, there is always the possibility that the words may not be used. So it's good we know that adverbials will always ask questions. So if I am asked of any grammatical name and its function, if that particular underlined sentence asks a question, then it's adverbial. Because I just stated noun clauses and phrases don't ask questions, neither do adjectival clauses or phrases. So she sings like an angel asks the question, how does she sing? Which points to the fact that the grammatical name is adverbial and the function is that it modifies the verb sings. Now there is something I would like to clear. In some cases, we could have more than one verb in the main clause. Where you have more than a verb in a main clause that an adverbial phrase or clause has to modify, then you refer to the function as it modifies the verb phrase. Remember in our introduction we said that adverb phrases are two adverbs joined together, adverb phrases. So is it with verbs. When you see two verbs together simultaneously, that means they are called verb phrases. So where you have two verbs in the main clause and you have your grammatical name as adverbial phrase or adverbial clause, and you want to state the function, which is always to modify a verb, and you notice that you have these two verbs joined together, then your function will be that it modifies the verb phrase. It will no longer be it modifies the verb. But where it is only one verb in the main clause, then it modifies the verb. But where you have two verbs, if you have a sentence like, she will sing like an angel today. She will sing like an angel. Will is a verb, sing is also a verb. Will is your auxiliary verb, which helps the verb sing to stand in that sentence. She will sing like an angel today. And we underline like an angel today. She will sing how? Like an angel. So that's adverbial phrase. What's the function? It modifies the verb phrase will sing. But in this case, we have she sings like an angel. So it modifies, it's just one verb there. It modifies the verb sings. So once you have two verbs together, that's what I'm trying to clear now. If you have two verbs together, then it is verb phrase. Just like we have adverb phrase where you have two adverbs. Alright, these are all adverbials of manner, but there is only one actual adverb in there, that is very. In all these sentences that we have just one adverb. Buy, it's a preposition. Bike is a noun. In the second example, we have in. In is a preposition. A is an article, an indefinite article. Then we have very, that's an adverb describing the voice, very loud. Loud is an adjective. Remember we said that adverbs are words that modify what? Verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. So we see that in this case of sentence number 2, we have very as an adverb modifying the word loud, which is an adjective, which tells us the state of the voice. So very is an adverb, loud is an adjective, and voice is a noun. In the third example, we have like. We have like, which is a preposition. We have an, which is an article, and we have angel, which is a noun. Alright, so let's look at adverbial phrases of time. Adverbial phrases of time state when or how often something happens or for how long. Practically, when we talk about adverbial phrases of time, when is usually the keyword, but we also have while. While is also another word that introduces adverbial phrase of time. Now let's look at some of these examples. It says she arrives at work at about 8:30 a.m. She arrives at work at about 8:30 a.m. So when does she arrive at work? You said it's asking the question when. When does she arrive at work? At about 8:30 a.m. See the at again, introducing preposition and not an adverb. About, still the preposition. So we'll look at the function. Remember we said that the function of any adverbial phrase, be it adverbial phrase of manner, adverbial phrase of time, adverbial phrase of frequency, adverbial phrase of degree, adverbial phrase of reasoning, whichever, the function is always to modify the verb in the main clause. So for the example number 1, the verb there is arrives, so it modifies the verb arrives. Number 2 says I will come round to see you in 1 hour. When? When will you come round? In 1 hour. What's the function? Is look at that thing I said earlier on. I will come round. Will is a verb. Come is also a verb. So in this case, the function is what? It modifies the verb phrase will come. Exactly what I was stating. So once you have two verbs in a sentence, do well to indicate that is a verb phrase. If you choose one, you will be failed. So once the two verbs are together, the helping verb alongside the main verb, you put together the two as your verb phrase. She interrupts me every 5 minutes. How often does she interrupt? Is a question. Every 5 minutes. And the function is it modifies the verb interrupts. So the accidents happen at least twice. How often does it happen? At least twice a year. Accidents happen. So what's the function? It modifies the verb happen. Right. So finally we have I always feel happiest. When do you feel happiest? All right. You see, it's asking a question. If you can actually understand this very fact, then identifying adverbial phrases and adverbial clauses in our grammatical names and function will not really be hard. For me, it's the easiest. Yes, adverbial clauses and phrases, they are the easiest to identify when it comes to grammatical names and functions because they don't really share anything in common with other types of grammatical names, unlike the noun clause and the adjectival clause. So finally, we have I always feel happiest during summer. When do I feel happiest? During summer. So it modifies the verb feel. Feel is a verb, and in this type of verb we refer to it as word linker. I told us that verbs are action words, verbs link, and verbs are state of being words. Finally, we have adverbial phrases of place, which answers the question where. She's living where? In Spain. What's the function? It modifies the verb phrase is living. Yes, I can't leave out is and take living because I can't say she's living in Spain. That's an incorrect English. Though living is an action word, but because of its use in the continuous tense, it needs the auxiliary verb to make perfect meaning. Okay, so we have number 2 example says, I will park by the side of the road. Where will you park? By the side of the building. What's the function? It modifies the verb phrase will park. It modifies the verb phrase will park. Then finally, the cafe is located near the bank. Where is the cafe located? Near the bank. So you see that the function, virtually all of them has to do with the verb phrase. This is in the bit to make us understand that adverbial clauses or phrases do not just modify verbs, but we can have a case where the verb can be two, and it will be that it modifies the verb phrase. You will see then that in a lot of these examples, it is prepositional phrases acting as adverbial phrases. You must have that at the back of your mind, that prepositional phrases can act as adverbial phrases because it does what? It asks you questions. All right, so let's look at positions of adverbial phrases. Yes, it's important for us to know that in some cases, adverbial phrases can be placed at the start of a sentence. It's not necessarily a must that it ends the sentence. It depends on the structure. Remember, writers differ from each other, and one could decide to write starting his or her sentence with an adverbial phrase while another decides to end. So whichever way, it's your choice. But we must know that it's possible for us to have our adverbial phrases at the start of the sentence so we will not be confused. So what do we mean by fronted adverbial phrases? By fronted adverbial phrases, we mean placing the phrase, the adverbial phrase, at the start of a sentence. All right. So the purpose of fronting is either simply to vary sentence structures, like I said earlier, just to vary it. It's not like there's something so special about it. It's just to vary sentence structures to make a piece of writing more interesting, or to draw attention to that part of the sentence because it is seen to be important. Just like the example that I made in the afternoon. What happened? One would want to know. It calls for attention. In the afternoon, she went hunting. Or some other person could say she went hunting in the afternoon. That's more like the usual way of writing. So once you start with your adverbial phrase and the other aspects of the sentence follow suit, you have carried out what we call fronted adverbial phrases. Now these are some of the examples in grammatical names and functions. So the sentence number 1 says, over the last 3 years, standards of living in the country have declined over the last 3 years. Remember, I told us that adverbial phrases are usually started with prepositions, but because they ask us questions like when, where, how, often, or how, and it shows adverbial. So over the last 3 years, standards of living in the country have declined, and we are underlining over the last 3 years. Now there is one striking thing about fronted adverbial phrases. I must let us know. Once you start your sentence with adverbials, there must be a comma. So there must be a comma. So if you start your sentence with adverbials and you don't observe your comma, mechanically you are wrong. So once you use your fronted adverbials, do well to use your comma the moment you are done with that aspect of the sentence that indicates adverbial phrase. So you can see examples in the 3 sentences we have. You see the comma observed at every given opportunity where we feel we have to pause a little for the adverbial to be indicated. So over the last 3 years, standards of living in the country have declined. So we are asked to identify the grammatical name and the function. So over the last 3 years, and I ask, what happened over the last 3 years? When over the last 3 years, that's adverbial phrase of time. When did the standard of living in the country decline? When did it decline? That means it tells me that it's adverbial phrase of time. Like I said, how do I know that it's adverbial phrase? I do not have a verb. As a matter of fact, a finite verb. That's what makes a group of sentence to be referred to as a phrase. When you do not have a finite verb. Why do I say finite verb? Because it is possible to have a verb, but it is not finite. If I have my ing type of verb starting a sentence or within a sentence without the auxiliary verb, then it is a phrase. That verb can be referred to as non-finite. Why? Because it doesn't show tense, rather it does the work of an adjective or a gerund. That will be discussed maybe further when we look at other aspects of English. So the function is that it modifies the verb phrase have declined. Where is the verb phrase? In the main clause, which is standards of living in the country have declined. That is what happened over the last 3 years. All right, so that is it. Number 2 says, after the film. What happened after the film? That's also adverb of time. After the film, they walked to the restaurant. Where did they walk to after the film? To the restaurant. So that's it, adverbial phrase of time. It modifies the verb walked. Lastly, as often as necessary, I will help her out. Adverb of time. Adverbial phrase of time, and it modifies the verb phrase will help. Right, what's the difference between adverbial phrases and clauses? Very important. Adverbial phrases and clauses. The difference here is quite simple. The key difference between between phrases and clauses is that a clause contains a subject-verb combination, whereas a phrase does not. I stated it, that a clause has a finite verb, while a phrase does not have a finite verb. Sometimes just group of words all right? In the house, in the upper chamber, under the tree, under the mango tree. Those are phrases. No verb, doesn't make sense, cannot stand on its own. There's always something missing about the phrase, and that's the absence of the finite verb, which has been indicated here. So as an example, take a look at these two adverbials of time, answering the question, how long did she keep phoning for? One is a phrase and one is a clause. She kept phoning me until I picked up the phone. She kept phoning me until I picked up the phone. Now we are underlining from until I picked up the phone. Until I picked up the phone. That's adverb of time. All right? Until I picked up the phone. That's adverbial clause with subject verb. That's the sentence number one. Why do we so? Because I is there and picked is also there. Picked shows past tense. Remember I told us that finite verbs are verbs that show tense, but non-finite verbs do not show tense. So sentence number one has a verb, not just a verb, but a finite verb. It's showing us tense. What type of tense? Past tense. And as such, it is adverbial clause, and it modifies the verb phrase kept phoning. Kept phoning. Now, number two says she kept phoning me until 10 p.m. and we are underlining from until 10 p.m. You see that we just have two words joined together, no verb in it. So that is it, until 10 p.m. she kept phoning me. That's adverbial phrase, no subject and no verb. But it's the same way with the first sentence, it modifies the verb phrase kept phoning. So that is it. Clauses have subject and verb, while phrases do not. Now this is a task I prepared for us aside our exam guide. Now I would like that you practice identifying the adverbial phrases in the sentence. I didn't underline any, so I expect you to indicate where the adverbial phrases start and tell me the function. All right, I think I have about 10 questions, but let's do number one. It says the beggar is begging from door to door. Where? From door to door. So I'm underlining from door to door, which is adverbial phrase. What's the function? It modifies the verb phrase is begging. So that being said, let us look at one of the wire questions on our exam guide and see how far we have learned. Right, I think I will go to 2015. Okay. Comprehension. That's it. So let's look at the question, the comprehension passage. I told us it's basically a comprehension passage exercise. You can't see it in any other place except possibly when you enter the university and you're going through your GST courses, possibly use of English, and such questions could be asked. But as long as you're writing WAEC, you're preparing for WAEC, then it has to be a comprehension exercise. So let's look out for it. Not long, okay, that is it. Not long after the governor's official proclamation. Now, one thing with this is that once the question is asked, you are expected to go back to the comprehension passage to indicate where the sentence is or where the group of words are. So once you find where the group of words are, what do? You check the first word. Notice that the first word from of the underlined tells you the grammatical name. So not long after the governor's official proclamation, newspaper, that's a time, not long. That means it has to do with time. So you see that it didn't start with an adverb like I stated. It will obviously start with preposition or any other thing indicating time factor. So not long after the governor's official proclamation, newspaper reporters had a few days speculating on the unprofessionalized. Okay, that's all. We don't need all the long sentences. So looking at this sentence, this is our fronted adverbial. Just like I told us, sometimes the adverbs could start a sentence, sometimes it could be at the end of the sentence. So you must take that into cognizance. So this is fronted adverbial, and this is adverbial time, adverbial phrase of time. Why do I say so? There is no verb here. Not long after the governor's official proclamation. These are both articles, nouns, adjectives, nouns. So we don't have any adverb here, and we don't have any verb. So because we don't have any verb in the sentence, in the group of words, it is adverbial phrase. Adverbial phrase of time. So what's the function? I will go to the main clause from this point of newspaper after the comma. That's where the main clause is. I will look out for the acts that happened, or the linker, or a helping verb. So he said, not long after the governor's official proclamation, newspaper reporters did what? Had. That was what happened. So that's my function. So the answer is what? Adverbial phrase of time, and the function is that it modifies the verb had. Alright, this one says what? As he dragged it to the surface. I have to find where it is in the passage because that will help me identify my function. Without that, I can't do justice. Okay, I've seen it in the passage. So as shows what? Time. Alright, so as he dragged it to the surface, what happened? I need to find what happened as he did the work. So you can see it's another fronted adverbial. So this is what? As he dragged, that's an action. So it can be adverbial phrase. In this case, it is adverbial clause. Why? Because we have a verb. Not just that we have a verb, we have a finite verb. How do I know it's a finite verb? Because it shows tense. That is past tense. It dragged. So as he dragged it to the surface, what happened? We screamed. That's the action. Whatever happens is your function. That's how to get the function in an adverbial clause. Be it adverbial clause or phrase. Ask yourself what happened. The moment you read the grammatical name and you're certain it's adverbial, you want to get your function, ask yourself what happened in the main clause. So here we have adverbial clause of time, and what's the function? It modifies the verb screamed. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and practice mode. It also has other features that make learning fun. It is a must-have for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to people that will benefit from it. Bye.